Maybe the groundhog got it right after all. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, we turned the clocks forward and it almost seemed like spring, didn't it? Interesting week in presidential politics. Hillary Clinton says she had a private email because it was convenient. She's deleted tens of thousands of emails she says are private, and no, she's not going to be letting anybody look at that server. Legislators consider a bill to reform the John Doe process in Wisconsin. A Marine from Port Washington was among 11 dead from a military helicopter crash in Florida. And a new poll finds record low confidence in government. But we start with a police shooting in Madison. Last weekend, 19-year-old Tony Robinson was shot and killed after allegedly assaulting a Madison police officer answering a 911 call. Within hours, Madison found itself at the center of a national debate over police, race, and the use of force. Under state law, the investigation is being conducted by the State Department of Justice, but the protests have taken an interesting turn. Well, most demonstrators focused on demanding justice for Robinson and accountability for the police officer involved. Union activists turned some of the protests into demands for a higher minimum wage, more taxes on business, and a protest of the state's right-to-work law. Joining me on our panel this morning, former State Representative Michelle Litchens, Defense Attorney Dan Adams, and the managing editor of rightwisconsin.com, Colin Roth. So let's talk. We'll start off with the shooting in Madison. Once again, we have a national story. Police officer shoots a young unarmed black man. Your take on how this case is going to play out?
Well, it's terrible, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that people don't get. And I think it's a product of our politics right now is that everybody runs to one side. Either I'm way pro-police or I'm really pro-African-American person. What we don't know right now is all the facts, and they're gonna game out pretty quickly. What we need to do, and what I think is, and I'll give Brad Schimmel some credit here, he's fast-tracking the investigation. It's going to be done in 2 weeks, which is a sharp contrast to John Chisholm.
A very, very sharp contrast. Well, I mean, one of the concerns that I think we have in a case like this is whether or not people, as you point out, you shove it into a narrative, and as a result, you prejudge the case. But I think, Colin, you wrote about this earlier this week as well. The way in which these protests have become hijacked by activists who see a protest, see a tragedy, and figure out a way, hey, here's how I can advance my political agenda.
Yeah, first off, we don't know what happens. I agree with Dan, and hopefully we'll find out in short order. But what we do know is that a tragedy occurred, and what we also know is whatever occurred, on that Friday night did not have anything to do with the minimum wage, did not have anything to do with collective bargaining rights, and did not have anything to do with school funding cuts. It's just kind of gross to see that unions would take over those protests.
Well, also you have the complexity of these stories with people rushing to judgment before we have all the facts. What we do know is that we had that 911 call that Tony Robinson had been involved in some sort of altercation, including apparently trying to strangle one of his friends. We also know that he'd been convicted of armed robbery. So, I know that the media has this investment into making him into the gentle giant. But I think that everybody should be advised to dial down the rhetoric just a little bit.
Oh, I completely agree, and I think we are very fortunate that we have an attorney general now in Wisconsin who says we are going to investigate this and put this on the fast track. So hopefully we're going to have a clear answer to exactly what happened very shortly.
I also thought it was interesting that the protesters marched on the governor's mansion rather than the mayor's office, given the fact that this is a municipal effect. But also, I mean, can I just take a moment to point out that this is the People's Republic of Madison? We are dealing with one of the most liberal communities, one of the touchiest police departments in America, and yet one of the things that's being exposed is how deep the racial divide is even in Madison.
They are, and Madisonians like to look down at Milwaukee and say, if you'd only do it like us, meaning the far left way of doing things, taking control of societal issues, they're having to deal with this. But if you look at the numbers, they expel students out of Madison schools, African-American students, at a higher clip than Milwaukee. They have just as high arrest and incarceration rates for African-American men vis-a-vis white men. So they're going to have to actually do more than protest.
Okay, one of the things that happened also last week was, of course, the shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, where somebody clearly set out to assassinate two police officers because they were police officers. This took place at an anti-police demonstration. And Sheriff David Clark has been on national television saying, look, that it is time to lower the temperature of some of the anti-police rhetoric. He's been very critical of President Obama and Eric Holder. And he also thinks that people ought to be putting out the message, hey, how about not resisting arrest from police officers? Is he right about that, Colin Roth?
He is right, and it's frustrating as we've seen. Something like the hands up, don't shoot thing becomes a myth, and when you get caught up in these myths, it's very, very difficult to get rid of them, and that's what I fear is going to happen in this Madison thing. We don't know what happened that night, but these myths kind of spring up, and it gets people's passions inflamed.
Well, and then you also see that ambushing police officers has increased 50% in 2014. We need law enforcement out there protecting us, and we should be thanking them for the job that they're doing. But I think Sheriff Clark is spot on by saying people need to obey the police when they pull you over. Just simply do what they ask you to do, and we need our leaders also to be encouraging people to respect police officers.
I think this is one of those moments you step back and you go, okay, we have had violence against police officers. There are legitimate narratives. There are competing narratives. I mean, clearly, I think the African American community has a legitimate issues to raise about their relationship with police, the legitimate concerns about driving while black, and those things need to be addressed. But on the other hand, I think law enforcement also has a legitimate case in saying, you know what, this anti-police fervor has been whipped up, it has been enabled, and is creating a very dangerous environment in our society right now. And a lot of the people who I think are in a position to help are making it worse. So what has your glass half full? What has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Michelle, you get to go first this week.
All right. Well, my glass is half full because Chachi endorsed Scott Walker for president this week. It is half empty because I'm still waiting to hear for an endorsement from the Fonz.
Dan Adams.
My glass is half empty because U.S. Senate Republicans broke protocol and sent a highly provocative letter to the Iranian government in an attempt to scuttle negotiations with that country. The letter was irresponsible and sets a bad precedent. My glass is half full because even 1/3 of GOP activists polled in New Hampshire and Iowa called the letter a mistake and a political gift for Obama and Democrats.
Colin Roth.
Let me give you the flip of that. My glass is half empty because an open letter, basically an editorial, signed by 47 Republicans outlining the constitutional parameters of any Iran deal earned calls for prosecution. But my glass is half full because the letter served its purpose, and the Obama administration was forced to admit an agreement with Iran would not be binding beyond 2016.
Yeah. What an amazing thing, Dan. It turns out that the senators also have a phone and a pen. My glass is half full because we seem to be seeing some full-blown Hillary Clinton fatigue, especially after that press conference last week. My glass is half empty because, well, she's a Clinton, and we just might have to put up with 10 more years of the lying arrogance and debates over the meaning of the word is. Next on Sunday Insight, why did President Obama weigh in on Wisconsin's right-to-work law? With the stroke of a pen, Wisconsin last week became the nation's 25th right-to-work state. But in a move that raised some eyebrows, President Obama took time from his busy schedule to lash out at the bill and at Scott Walker. Obama said in a statement, "I am deeply disappointed that a new anti-worker law in Wisconsin will weaken rather than strengthen workers in the new economy." And that raised the question, why was the President of the United States talking about a bill passed by a state legislature and a state governor, Colin Roth?
Scott Walker's running for president. He's very clearly the front runner, if not a front runner, and I think this was an attempt to try and fire up maybe the left to focus on what Scott Walker's doing here in Wisconsin. What I can't figure it out is why he would. I mean, there's a cynical side of me that almost says, are they looking to elevate Scott Walker because they think he's more beautiful?
That was the effect. I mean, if you were Scott Walker, I mean, how much money would you have to pay to get the kind of publicity in a Republican primary?
That's right.
Of a presidential rep? So why did the president feel the need to weigh in on this?
I'm just sad that the bipartisan kumbaya moment on ethanol subsidies was broken up here. You have Scott Walker going against free market capitalism and coming out this week for ethanol subsidies. I don't know why Obama did it other than he is the head of the Democratic Party. What I'm more intrigued by is where's Hillary on this and where is Russ Feingold, who, again, is trying to come back, run against Ron Johnson and be the head Democrat in the state. Where has he been?
I think Russ Feingold is hanging out in the same bunker as Tammy Baldwin. Your reaction, why did this get escalated that way?
Honestly, I believe this happened because Obama is not up for re-election again, and I think he's going back to his true blue colors. I mean, he's an extreme leftist, and he just felt like sharing his opinion on this. Now, I'm curious why. Well, actually, I really enjoyed seeing Scott Walker come back with, why isn't the president doing something about jobs, and why didn't he approve the Keystone Pipeline?
Well, Colin Roth, I mean, obviously, a lot of people read this and said, well, this is an indication that the President of the United States thinks that Scott Walker is if not the front runner in the Republican presidential race.
Yeah, and I guess it'll be an interesting litmus test. There's some other states that will be considering right to work soon, and if he has the same response. But I also think there's another possibility in that he's throwing labor a bone. I mean, he has not been on the best terms with big labor, from the Keystone Pipeline to some of the things that went on during the election.
Dan Adams took a shot there. He said that Walker flip-flopped on the ethanol mandate last week. Did he?
Only sort of, because he said he wants to get rid of it, but
Yes, he flip-flopped. Is there any question? Well, he flip-flopped, but now he tried to explain a little bit later that he still wants to phase out that renewable fuel standard in 2 years. At least that's what he said to a California publication. So is that a full flip-flop, a modified flip-flop?
It's only a modified flip-flop.
It's unfortunate. Scott Walker had it right the first time, is what I would say when he was talking about ethanol.
Do you know what else? I also think that he would have gained so much respect from Republican voters all across the country if he would have actually stood his ground.
I agree. You know what's interesting about the Obama letters? He gave a little bit of practical political advice, saying, you know how you could make this sting a little worse for Wisconsin workers? Raise the minimum wage, which I actually think if he triangulated on that issue and came to the state legislature and gave it.
I didn't answer your question before. You asked where was Hillary Clinton on the right to work issue. She was too busy explaining about that secret email server that she had, and that didn't go that well. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we will tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michelle Litchens, you get to go first again.
If you receive a phone call from the IRS agent saying that you owe back taxes and to avoid an audit, drive to their office and pay a fee, it's a scam. I received this call and it was extremely intimidating. But remember, the IRS doesn't call you, they mail you scary letters instead.
Dan Adams.
To lawmakers, it costs well over $30,000 to incarcerate a person for a single year. Hold state judges accountable by requiring judges to calculate a fiscal note for each of the sentences they render.
Colin Roth.
To Republicans in the legislature threatening to hold up the statewide expansion of school choice over an accountability disagreement, please reconsider. We're in the 5th year of Republican-controlled government, and the statewide expansion needs to get done.
Geez, I want to respond to this. Maybe criminals should have to do a fiscal note of the net impact of their crimes. To people on both sides, my unsolicited advice, withhold judgment on the Madison police shooting. The facts will come out. This is not a time to score political points or paint false narratives. It also might be a good idea for activists to dial down the anti-cop rhetoric. Next on Sunday Insight, what did our senators know about the scandal at the Tomah VA Center, and when did they know it? Senator Tammy Baldwin remains more or less silent about her role in covering up a critical report on drug abuse at the Tomah VA, but the local newspaper last week was focused on her colleague Ron Johnson. The front page story in the Journal Sentinel charged that Ron Johnson aides sat on whistleblower tips on Tomah VA. Senator Johnson pushed back, noting that Baldwin had never shared the smoking gun report from the Inspector General's office that revealed the extent of the problem. Senator Baldwin received the report last August and has never really explained why she kept that report secret until January. So what is your take on all of this? Are the waters muddied? Is Johnson in the same situation as Baldwin, Michelle?
I don't think they're in the same situation at all. I think the article wasn't as specific as maybe it could have been. Ryan contacted the Johnson office.
You're talking about the whistleblower.
The whistleblower, right? Contacted the Johnson office this past summer, but we don't really know why he contacted the office. I think there might be a few other reasons why he contacted them in the first place. They did not have that report until January, and as soon as the Johnson office had that report, they've been on it. They've been in constant contact with the whistleblower. They've been actively talking to the media and the Veterans Office trying to fix this problem.
Okay, so last Friday, Tammy Baldwin sort of came out of her bunker to say what mistakes were made and issued a report essentially exonerating herself. Is that right?
Yeah, mistakes were made. Yeah. The staff could have done a better job. You know, but real no admission of guilt, and this thing is only getting started for Tammy Baldwin. We know that she has a high-powered D.C. Democratic lawyer.
Right.
We know that she fired a staffer over this. There could be more firings, and we also know that that fired staffer is considering lawsuit against Tammy Baldwin. This is nowhere near done for her.
But the timeline on this, correct me if I'm wrong. You know, last July, Tammy Baldwin finds out about this Inspector General smoking gun report.
A non-public report.
Non-public report. It is still secret. She gets the copy in August, does nothing about it. August, September, November, December, January. Johnson only gets a copy of that in January, and the front page story was about Johnson sitting on it. Is that right? Am I getting that correct?
That's essentially correct. Yep.
Okay, but the reality is that that story, that headline is going to be enough to get Russ Feingold. That, at least ads for months, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting to see the conservative media has been fanning the flames of this story for months now, and to see the thing boomerang back on Ron Johnson is interesting. As a Democrat, a little heartening.
Even though it's bogus.
Again,
the whole point of the story is there is this report. Your girl sat on that for how long?
But again, Senator Johnson had information. He told the whistleblower, we're doing something about it. And what he did was essentially take the file from one staffer, go across the hall and give it to another staffer.
Yeah.
Oh, we're working on it. Great job. What's more interesting is Ron Johnson's in a precarious political position. He lags behind Russ Feingold by 9 points.
Right.
He lags behind Mary Burke by 1 point in a poll that was done last week.
Yeah, well, the poll by Public Policy Polling, which is the Democratic polling outfit. Okay, since we're on this issue, you've broken bad on Russ Feingold several times on this show, and I've read about you in blogs. People are very unhappy. So what is your issue with Russ Feingold? Because I know a lot of Democrats think that Russ Feingold is a great hope, that he's going to be able to win that seat back. What is your beef?
My biggest criticism of Feingold in particular is he hasn't been here. He didn't go through the fires of the last few years. He made off to Stanford and other places.
Yeah.
Moreover, it's more of a criticism of the Democratic Party and why we don't have a Feingold of 1992. A young person who will serve many terms, who can be a leader of the party long term, not a 61-year-old who's coming back at one more try.
Well, what is the answer to that? Why don't you?
Well, there's 5.5 million people in this state. I'm sure there's about 10,000 Democrats who could honorably and capably serve as a U.S. Senator.
I'm actually fascinated by this question because, you look at any poll anywhere, except the poll that you just cited, and it will show that people really want change, right? I mean, they want new, fresh faces, and the Democrats look like they're going to be putting up Hillary Rodham Clinton for president and Russ Feingold for Senate. That does certainly raise a question about, which party has the deeper bench.
I would agree. In Wisconsin, the Democrats do not have a very deep bench. I think the Republicans, though, have a very extensive bench for future elections.
It is still going to be a tough race for Johnson for Senate, just because of the nature of the electorate. So what is it you don't get? So let's go around the table this week. Michelle Litchinger first.
Charlie, what I don't get is if President Obama was really upset that someone tried to kill police officers, why wouldn't he have done more than send out a tweet?
Dan Adams.
I don't get why we've spent 2 weeks talking about Hillary's email server, but many members of the legislature, Milwaukee County Board, and Common Council use their personal email accounts for official purposes to skirt public records law. How about a law prohibiting this?
Colin Roth.
What I don't get is why those who actually care about Tony Robinson, justice, and the truth allow the opportunistic parasites like Wisconsin Jobs Now to co-opt their protest. It's ugly and it increases division.
Well, what I don't get is why the Democrats don't really have a plan B for Hillary Clinton. This is a big party. It's a big country. How did the party's bench get this thin? I'm just asking for a friend. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michelle Litchins, you're first.
Well, my winner is Vodafone, who announced they will provide 16 weeks paid maternity leave and then 30-hour work weeks for 6 months with full pay for new moms. They believe this will help retain good employees and save money in the long run. They did this without a government mandate because it was good business sense. My loser is Homestead High School. They are eliminating final exams because they believe finals are too stressful for our children. Is it any wonder why our students trail the rest of the world academically?
Dan Adams.
My winner is Mayor Tom Barrett, who seems newly energized and flexing his political muscles, first during the streetcar fight and now with the Bucks Arena debate. It'll be interesting to see if this new feistiness lasts. My loser, Milwaukee County Treasurer David Cullen, in his attempt to pass down his former county board seat to his 23-year-old son, it appears he broke campaign finance laws by failing to report an in-kind contribution to his son's campaign.
Colin Roth.
My winner this week is Scott Walker, who proved he is a Republican frontrunner by having Barack Obama issue a statement attacking him for signing a right-to-work law. I also think it was probably worth a few pennies. My losers are all the liberals who emailed Scripps asking them to fire this guy, Charlie Sykes. It backfired as the Scripps CEO saw the influence of Charlie and said the uproar made Charlie's job, quote, extremely safe. Well done.
Well, I I did appreciate that. Loser, Hillary Clinton. Polls say the country wants someone new and someone who represents change. In other words, somebody who's not Hillary. Winner, Scott Walker. This was a good week to be the fresh face and the outsider in the presidential race. And that attack by Obama, pure gold in the Republican primary. It probably should be Dan Adams for his winner and loser, Tom Barrett's leadership, because it probably indicates that Dan Adams also found a unicorn in his backyard. Thanks for joining us and joining me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week. Good luck with you.